Hey, bumper away.
Hey, this is Michael O'Neill from the Solopreneur Hour podcast, and you are listening to Vroom Vroom Veer with Jeff Smith. Listen up.
Woo! That was awesome. Thank you.
Cool, man.
Cool, man.
Are you ready to thoughtfully steer away from your revved up, frenzied, and far too often scripted life? Then welcome to Vroom Vroom Veer with Jeff Smith, where he guides you down the road differently traveled by sharing unique experiences with guests who have managed to shift away from a life stuck on cruise control and veered their way into a more authentic and fulfilling one in all sorts of interesting and kind of remarkable ways. Get ready to Vroom Vroom Veer with your differently traveled road chauffeur, Jeff Smith.
Hola, ¿cómo está? Konnichiwa. O genki desu ka? Hello, welcome to the show. So, this is probably one of my favorite interviews. I think I did a little bit of fanboy-ish, but I am a huge fan of Eric Zimmer's podcast, The One You Feed. If you're here, you're probably familiar, but I'll give you a little lowdown. It's based on a parable of how a grandfather is telling his son a story about how people have two wolves who live inside of them, a good wolf and a bad wolf. And, you know, he gets a little bit deeper into it, but the grandson asks the grandfather which one wins because they're always battling. And the grandfather says, the one you feed. And so Eric's show is all about how to feed your good wolf. So I love that. I love parables and I love metaphors. So I thought Eric would be a great guest for this show. And this is a really raw, sort of wide open kind of talk where Eric shares a lot about his days in and out of recovery and his fight with not only alcohol addiction, but addiction in general. And then how he started there and how he hit rock bottom, and you'll hear it. But I mean, it's interesting because I can totally relate. He also was depressed clinically, so I did that too. So this was fun in one of those sort of like not fun ways. It's not as morose as you might think because, you know, we're both over it now and we're on the other side of the pain. So we are lighthearted about the whole conversation, but it does get a little deep. So, you know, you are warned, but at the end we're laughing and it's all good. So please prepare yourself, gird your loins. It's not that bad. But here's my chat with Eric Zimmer of the One You Feed podcast. It is recording. My level looks good. Maybe a smidge more volume on my level. Okay, good to go. All right, here we go. Hello, Eric Zimmer. Thank you for being here. Thank you for coming to Vroom Vroom Veer.
Thanks, Uper. I am happy to be here.
Oh, by the way, I didn't tell you, I'm going by Jeff on the new show, but that's okay. You can call me Uper if you like it.
we can do it again. Let's start over.
No, that's fine. You just, from now on, I didn't tell you. I didn't prep you. Oh. That's okay. It'll be a fun part of the show. It's cool.
All right, Jeff. I'm glad to be here.
Sorry, that's a nervous laugh. Anyway, yeah, I did a whole other show where somebody was calling me Uper, and I'm branding myself as Jeff now, so it's no big deal. Okay, so you know a tiny little bit about vrooming and veering, because I just told you, and I gave you the 5-minute version, but so vrooming is when your life on autopilot, much like the movie Groundhog Day, where everything seems like it's the same day over and over again, and you're head down and you're focused, and it's for the sake of keeping metaphors simple, it's the bad side. It would be your bad wolf, right? And veering is when you have an opportunity to feed your good wolf. So tell me a little bit about and your life, and maybe let's start talking about your life as from the lens of rooming and veering. Start with the vroom period.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of vroom periods, and I think as you were just talking about that, what came to my mind was how there are some very significant, long vrooms, big veers, and I think those are probably the most interesting to talk about. But what came to mind as you were just reading that is I thought, you know what, life works best for me when it's short vrooms, short veers, like it's sort of a constant, like I'm pushing, I'm working.
Yes.
And
I'm
then I make
that too.
it's a small adjustment, and then more and more, and a small adjustment instead of these long periods of
unconsciousness, basically.
Right. That result.
Sleepwalking.
Yeah, and in my case, those long periods of unconsciousness have resulted in more than loss. Loss is greater than just lost time.
Sure.
And then the veers have to be pretty dramatic, and it seems to work better when we can just keep those two things closer together.
Oh yeah, definitely. I that's one of the first things I learned. I don't know if you're a fan of the Tim Ferriss podcast or not.
I've listened to some of it. It's very good.
Yeah, I love it. One of his early guests was Josh Waitzkins, the Searching for Bobby Fischer kid guy now. He's not a kid anymore. But anyway, he told this story about one of the martial artists that he hangs out with. His whole philosophy of his martial arts is living in transition, in the liminal space between the moves. And
right.
If that makes any sense, because most martial artists are working to get really good at hold A and then get really good at move B to get to hold C, right? And he just lives in transition. He wants to stay always moving, and it wigs people out. So that's why he's a champion. But anyway, yes, I get your point that the value is increasing the frequency of your vrooming and veering and making it daily, really, with practice. It's like if you can vroom and veer in a day, that's sort of like my show's version of feeding the good wolf, I think.
Right. Yep, you're absolutely right.
So tell us a little bit about one of your vroom periods, and just paint a picture. You can summarize a little bit in the vroom period, and then get down into story mode when you get to the veer, the big event that changed everything.
Well, probably the largest one was my transition from addiction to sobriety when I was 25 years old. So that was a pretty, you talk about the vroom of mindlessness into a pretty dramatic veer. That was the big one. I was 24 years old, right before I got sober. I was homeless. I was living in the back of a van with a couch. Sleeping on a couch I had stolen from I guess it's not stealing from a dumpster. I had picked up from a dumpster.
Right.
My life was a total disaster, and I had been going that way for about 7 years of pretty hard drinking and drugging. I was sick. I had hepatitis C, but I didn't know it. I was dying. Pretty clearly. I was facing about 35 years in jail. So I had been on a pretty crash course in not being, doing everything I could to not be barely even conscious, let alone mindful.
Right. So you were stuck in a numb kind of, everything in your life was just sort of like too loud, and you got hooked on numbing out, right? That's basically, is that the cycle? I don't know. I've never been there, but
I think people tend to go one of two ways. I think they either life is too loud and they numb it out. I almost think it was the opposite for me. I was somehow too numb, and the drugs and alcohol turned life on for a while.
Okay.
Now that stopped. There's a scene in an old movie, The Days of Wine and Roses, and one of the characters says to the other one, it's one of the best descriptions I've heard. It said, when I'm sober, life is like black and white, but when I drink, it's like someone turned the color on. And that's
right.
That's what my experience was. But then at a certain point, you've just I'd made such a mess of my life that the vicious cycle of addiction starts, which is now I don't feel good about my life, so I get high, and then I feel worse about my life because I got high and did something stupid again. And it's a quick,
It's a vicious cycle, right?
yeah, it's a vicious downward spiral for sure. And so that's kind of where I was at the age of I guess it was 24, when kind of it all came crashing to a halt. I had been trying for a couple of years on and off, unsuccessfully, to get sober, to clean up. And it was one of those, it took me a while to kind of figure it out and to get to a point where I think I was really ready. But that was a pretty dramatic veer for me. I mean, had I not veered then, I don't think I would be alive today, or
I
would
agree,
be, or I would have spent a good portion of the last 20 years in jail. So that's the real big one for me, and it was a very dramatic one, and one that I am eternally grateful for.
So what was the moment? What was the turning point? What happened?
Well, I think that there were a variety of things that led up to sort of a moment. But I was, as I said, I was living in the back of this van, and the van I had from this restaurant that I worked at. And one day, the police walked in the restaurant, and they came back and they arrested me. And that was the end of the job, the end of the van where I was living. And I didn't know, I just simply had no idea of what to do. I had a very expensive drug habit. I was going to be very sick in, the next morning, dope sick. And so I went and I checked myself into a rehab at that point with no intention of anything except I just don't know what else to do. I
don't know where else to go.
Yeah, I need to get, I need some time to regroup. I hadn't foreseen this coming, and so I was in there, and at one point they said, "We think you should go upstairs to our 28-day program." And I said, "I don't think so." Because clearly I had such important things I needed to go take care of on the outside. Exactly. And so, but at one point in that, in that multi-day detox that I was there, I had a bit of, in recovery, they call it a moment of clarity. And my moment of clarity was, I'm going to die if I go back out there. I have no ability not to go just do all this again. And so I said, yeah, I'll go upstairs to the longer treatment program. And so that was probably, if you wanted to look at a particular turning moment, that moment to decide to go to that and put certainly more effort at that point into trying to get sober than I ever had before. That was a pretty big commitment to say, all right, I'm going into this thing for 28 days. In retrospect,
you have to live through hell, basically, because the detox is excruciating from what I see. I don't know. I can't say that, but wow, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the part of the benefit of being in an institution like that is they will keep you relatively drugged up with this or that thing to allow you to transition in a way that's not quite so painful.
Oh, really? Okay, so they kind of step you down.
Yep. Well,
Okay.
They don't. In my case, I mean, it was heroin. They don't give you heroin, but they give you a variety of. Because what happens is when you come off that, it's such a depressant. When you come off it, your system is used to sort of trying to get back to normal so hard, so it's really revved up, and you take that away, and it's just like heart rate spikes, all that stuff, and you just.
So what part of the brain does? Do you know? Is heroin affecting dopamine, or is it like more? Okay.
It's a lot of dopamine, and there are specific opioid receptors in the brain,
right?
That it's affecting. So, yep.
Yikes. So,
but I was that was the main thing for me at the end. But I had, I was every bit. For me, it's not so much about what the drug was, because there had been periods where it was just alcohol, or periods where it was cough syrup. It wasn't. I mean, that stuff is, it makes a little bit of difference in maybe how you withdraw and different things. But the problem wasn't there. The problem was in my head with my approach to life, and any substance that would make me feel better would do.
Right. So how would you characterize that? I mean, because it doesn't sound like, so you weren't avoiding, you were chasing highs and not necessarily avoiding lows.
I think it's a little of both.
Okay.
I think there's certainly some of it's hard to it's hard for me to know exactly, because I do think there's definitely some degree of avoiding life, and there's some degree of it made me feel less numb. I mean, I've battled depression pretty much my whole life, and my main symptom of depression is not sadness, it's not crying, it's just total blank numbness.
Right.
And so I've always said 2 drinks is the best antidepressant that was ever developed. Works for me like a charm, except that it only, I only stay at 2 drinks for about 5 minutes, and then right, and then I'm way past it. And
right.
so
Right. Yes.
So I think it's a combination of things. But the long and short of it is, I don't like the way I feel in my mind, in my body. I want to feel different, and so whatever I'm feeling is not okay, and I must make it different.
But that's
the
still
heart of
going
it.
on every day, right? I mean, that doesn't change. You still have to deal with this. You just have better ways to do it now, right?
Yeah, well, we all do to some degree, right?
Exactly, right.
Yeah,
But
I think a lot of it is just the recognition that, okay, I'm in a bad mood, or I feel sad, or I feel numb, or I feel blank, or, and recognizing that, okay,
That's okay.
that is okay. It's
Right.
it's not going to kill me. It's gonna, but when you're in a state of addiction, that is like it's more of a panic. Like, I can't, there's just no ability to cope.
yeah,
at all.
actually, here we go, because you are familiar a little bit with Pema Chodron.
I love Pema Chodron.
Me
Yep.
too. And I didn't read the book that I know you read, because you read When Things Fall Apart, right?
Right. Yep.
I have the audio book of Getting Unstuck.
That's a good one too.
Oh, so okay, good. I'm glad you're familiar. But what you're talking about reminds me of what she calls Shenpa. Do you remember that one?
I don't.
Okay, so Shenpa is that little sort of like Eckhart Tolle might call it the pain body.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that, the panic feeling. Is what and so it's sort of like it's this guy inside of you. That's what it feels like to me. So
Yep.
I just got relatable, because I got triggered and got all reactive on Monday this week. And I really don't know why. I haven't figured out why, but I was able to talk myself down by like the afternoon, but the morning just went like really through the roof, crazy panicky. And this isn't this sort of like life-changing kind of like, it had been a very long time since I had gotten in that panic kind of state. And so, yeah, I just wanted to relate that still is around for me too.
Yep.
And I think it's around for everybody. So, right?
I think it is around for everybody. Some people just have, better skills to handle
right,
it, and structures. And I think that's a lot of it is, I don't think I knew until I got into recovery at 25 years old that, like, just that basic idea, like, okay, you can feel bad and it's okay. It's not the end of the world.
Right.
The
and it's
phrase,
normal, and it's okay. Right.
Exactly. And the phrase that someone said recently, I was like, that is perfect, is that emotions are not emergencies. When we have an emotion, we tend to feel like we have to do something with it. If we're angry, we have to go, deal with it. We have to go solve it. Or if we're,
Wow,
if
that's
we're,
good though.
and being able to just go, okay, I feel this way and I can experience it, and I just don't have to be so afraid. And if we're not so afraid of the emotion, if we don't have to make it go away so dramatically, we're much more capable of making good decisions, I think, in our lives about how we react to things that happen. But if we're in that, it's an emergency or panic or just really focused on how I'm feeling, we tend to not, at least I and a lot of people I know, tend to sort of go into what I would call more of a regressed state. When you get that way, you're very stressed, and the brain metaphor is you sort of moving out of that frontal cortex where our executive thinking and our ability to make good decisions is, and we're headed back towards the lizard brain, and we make
Being
worse
reactive.
decisions.
Right.
Yes.
It's for whatever reason, and that's what she calls Shenpa, is you've been put into that fight or flight mode. And once you're there, I think that a key here, though, and what really helped me on Monday was knowing that I was there.
That's right.
And I was still being reactive and panicky, and it lasted for a couple hours. But my executive was aware of what was going on.
Mm-hmm. And that makes it a little less scary, even if you can't quite make it settle down.
I was having a hard time pulling out of it. But I knew it was there, and I wasn't going off the deep end. And I was like, okay, I started thinking about like Whoop. You remember Whoop?
Yep.
Yeah. And I was like, I need a plan. I need a plan. And I didn't have one. So I think then I remembered talking to you, and I said pattern interrupt. So I took a walk, and that's what kind of got me out of it, because I was just sitting in the house too much. And by the time I got back from that walk, I was ready to get back to work. And it was pretty damn amazing. But there was a couple of panicked hours there. So yeah, I mean, these aren't sorts of feelings and things that just happen to people that are on the, scary, rock bottom. I mean, these things still happen. We still need, that's the point of my show, is really to come up with tools and structures, and this podcast is one of those tools and structures and social interactions that let you talk about it. And
I agree. And this sort of thing that you're doing is so important in that regard, to be able to, for people to know, oh, yep, I've felt that, and it is normal. When we talk about alcoholism and addiction and in recovery, it's, the chemicals are just a symptom. They're not the real problem. I mean, they are a problem. It needs to go before anything else can happen. But they're a symptom of kind of what we're discussing right here, which is an inability to cope.
Right. So, okay. So now we know where you were, and we know that the big Veer moment was when you decided to say yes to that 28-day treatment. So what happened next? Did that stick?
It did. That did stick. It's interesting. I in just thinking about it, I was in that detox program, and I was supposed to go to the 28-day treatment, but I said it was Christmas time, and I said, you got to let me go home for Christmas. And of course, Christmas Eve, I went and got high.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Right.
And I remember it. It was a truly, I got money from my grandma, and I did not want to go. I did not want to do it, and yet I was just, it felt like I was just being dragged through it. So that was the last, so I went back into the 28-day treatment, and it did stick. And so I think the dramatic veer was to decide to go in, but I think we tend to think of life as these big epiphanies. We have this epiphany, and then
everything changes.
Right.
That's not exactly how it works, though.
No, not for most people. There are some people who truly have a crazy epiphany. But for most people, there's still an awful lot of work to make that decision into a reality that stays that way.
I was going to say that the epiphany and or event or the one-timer thing is an opportunity. And there's a couple of points here that needs time to be incubated and processed in your whole brain, right? Sleep on it. It might take a month for that to roll around in your subconscious and make some neural pathways before you come up with a no-kidding decision that can change your life. And then a decision is not as important as, again, a commitment. So I'm thinking that there had to be a commitment moment for you.
I think the commitment moment was when I agreed to go to, that 28-day treatment. But in recovery, one of the, the cliches that is used all the time, I actually just did a mini episode on it last weekend, is one day at a time. And the reason is it's really difficult. Well, you can't make a commitment for next Thursday. And I mean, you can say one, but you can't actually do it. You can't fulfill the commitment till next Thursday. And so it's very easy to get overwhelmed, particularly with major changes like that. Like the example I always use is, I remember sponsoring a guy who was like, well, if I get sober, what about my wedding? Am I going to be able to drink at my wedding? I was like, you don't even have a girlfriend. Like, we're way out ahead of ourselves here, right? Like, let's just worry about now. But that's exactly that mentality. And I think we can get into it with anything. If we say, oh, I'm going to start a podcast, right? It's easy to get overwhelmed with all the work that has to be done.
All the details, right?
Right?
Yes.
But you only have to do the next one. And it's the same thing with, am I going to committing to a workout program? Am I really going to work out every day? Well, it's my intention, but all I can really do is work out today and maybe set the stage so it's easier to work out tomorrow.
Right.
And so that's
Baby
that one day at a
steps
time.
idea.
So it is a commitment. I do have a commitment to not use or drink again.
Right.
Because it hasn't worked out well for me. But I made that commitment then, and it stuck for about 10 years. And then I did drink again, and we can probably talk about that as another Vroom, Veer moment.
Situation. Right.
But
okay.
So I think I had to make the commitment kind of every day. And a lot of times I think people have an idea that when you make a decision or you have an epiphany, it should just be easy moving forward. And I have to say there were a lot of days it was 51% to 49%. 51% wanted to stay sober, 49% wanted to go get high, but it was just enough to get by. And I think it's that way, the same thing. If you want to go to you want to make a change to your health and go to the gym or eat better, or it's not like just because
it's not easy, that's for sure.
It's not easy. And I think we have a tendency to go, well, if I still have to struggle, like I still want that piece of chocolate cake, I bet, I'm just always going to be that way. And it's some days it's just kind of pushing past one more day, one more minute, one more hour. Just keep going.
This is where the present moment sort of mindfulness, sort of saturation, I guess, sort of like got me around to some really fundamental decisions about how I was like living my life. I think I had this delusion that you can like finish,
Right.
You know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. And at some point, I can just relax and I don't have to deal with X. Right. And that is a fallacy. I don't know if that's a psychological fallacy that's got a name, or I wish it did, because I guess the lesson is, go ahead. Yeah. Comment.
Well, I was going to say, I heard once there's a book out there called The Tools, which is written by a couple of psychiatrists, and it's pretty interesting. But the thing that was most interesting to me about it is they describe that phenomenon. They call it exoneration, which is an interesting word.
Okay.
But it's that idea that the day will come where I will have done what I need to do, and life should be easy moving forward. And that I think we all have this idea, like I will arrive, and life won't be a struggle, and I won't get. If I just do enough self-help, then I'll never be sad again. Or and that is totally a fallacy.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Someday I'll be cookies, but now I'm just dough. But I think we stay dough until they put us in the ground or burn us.
I think we do. Our challenges change.
Yeah, and we're a process. So. And I think that was the aha thing for me, was that I'm never done, and every day is I can get better. I can get better every day, but I can't wish for a life without problems, because that's just death. That's being dead. It's a fallacy. It's an illusion that we're chasing at.
It is, and I think that recognizing that and coming to terms with it makes that life, I think, always will take effort, but it doesn't always take struggle. And I think the struggle comes from resisting the fact that these things happen. I mean, there's that line of way of thinking that, it's our resistance to what's happening that causes the pain.
So true.
95% of the time.
Yes.
And so people resist this idea that life will take effort. And we want it to be different. And life is a lot easier when we just sort of accept that this is part of it. And I think the other thing for me was to realize that, like, I just always thought if I had a life where I didn't really have to do anything, I could do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, and then
awful.
I would be happy. And it's awful.
the worst.
I'm a wreck.
Yeah.
When that happens.
Yeah, because that's just beer and TV.
That's right.
And that's awful, right. So, okay. I wanted to say, because in that little area, I remembered your show about Dr. John Sorno and his book, right? And I have eczema, and it got really bad, okay? So I have to read that book because it's going to come back. I have that personality of basically I got addicted to itching is essentially what I've come up with, right? And it got to the point where this last year, like around Christmas time, I noticed that my ankles were swelling, and I had itched myself into this nasty little infection. Sorry, that's way too gross. I might edit this out. But anyway, I'm being vulnerable, right? That's what we do here.
Yep.
So, yeah. So then when I got chastised by the doctor, right? Like, she actually treated me like I was 8. Because I had one appointment, I got treatment, I got the stuff, and I think I might have scratched once in that whatever number of days, right? And that scratch was enough for her to look at me going, "What did you do? Did you scratch? Are you a child?" And she just laid into me, and I'm like, whoa, she's right. And I was like, I was giving myself permission to scratch once a day. And the pain was so intense, I got hooked on it. So I really, really have to read that book. I'm not sure which one it was. I'm not sure if I need to read the one about back pain, but he has several books. I'm going to check one out. But that show with you and the guy making the movie, I can't remember his name, Michael Galinsky or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That was a healing moment just listening to your podcast.
Well,
I got a little over that eczema scratchy addiction. Ugh, life. This brain, Matt.
Yep.
Anyway, let's move on to your next Vroom Veer period. So the Vroom was when you had a job, and then the Veer is a layoff. So let's get into that period.
Yeah, this was, when I got sober, I was 25, essentially, by the time I got out of treatment and all that, and had never done anything except work in a restaurant and, commit various illegal acts. And so I was like, I got to have a career. I never went to college. And so I got a job. Finally, I had a couple of jobs, but I finally got a job I wanted with a company called CompuServe. They were one of the early online pioneers. Yep. Yeah. And I got a job in the customer service department, and I just worked myself crazy, and I got promoted out of that. And I finally had a really cool, for me, it was just unbelievable, the type of job I had. And my...
So what were you doing? Were you like a chat room host or something?
No, I started in customer service. No,
Okay.
I'd moved into corporate training. So I was training
that sounds like a
CompuServe.
blast. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I loved it. And it was a great job. And my son's mother was 2 months pregnant with my son Jordan, and AOL bought CompuServe and laid a bunch of us off. And I remember that moment being, I was terrified then, I think. And, I think the Veer for me was, well, obviously I was forced into a Veer to a certain degree.
Right.
But then what I was able to do was take some of that severance money and some different things, and I invested in some training to further what I had already started learning to do. And that sort of launched me by the time I got through all that and did a couple of things that launched me into the world of internet startups, which was really my career for the next, 10 or 15 years, and to some degree forms part of what I, still do today. And so
Okay.
that was a pretty dramatic veer. But I think the lesson there for me, because I've had situations like that multiple times since, where employment has ended somewhat abruptly or unexpectedly for me, and I almost at this point have learned to welcome it as something for me that has always led to something better.
Right. It's a reset switch in a happy way. Almost.
Yeah, it doesn't feel it at the time. Now,
Yeah.
the most recent time it happened, I think it's been a while. It's been at least, probably 6 years. And, my wife was completely freaked out by it. And I was just like, don't worry, this will be fine. And so finally, after having gone through it a few times, I was at a point where I realized that there's that old cliche, like, when one door closes, another one opens.
Well, they're a
Which
cliche for a reason. There's truth in them.
that's exactly right. What
Yeah.
a lot of people don't mention about that cliche, though, is that sometimes that second door doesn't open right away, and you're kind of stuck in a dark hallway for a while.
Good visualization. I thought you were going to say maybe you ram into it and you have to pound on it for a while. But lost
No.
in a dark hallway is not cool either.
Yep. And I think it's just being able to have the faith that that door will open.
Sure. Oh yeah. So what happened in the dark hallway for you?
I think what happened in the dark hallway was that I learned to just keep moving.
Yes. Good,
I learned that, and it's a lesson that I talk about on the show all the time, and it was probably the key lesson in recovery, which was, you act your way into right thinking often. It's very hard sometimes to think your way into right action. It's very hard sometimes. Emotions seem to be, to me, they're the one thing that we can't directly affect. You can't, at least I've never been able to, and I don't know anyone who can go in and just change an emotion. You can change your thoughts and you can change your behavior.
Right.
And those can act as levers that change your emotions.
Right.
But
You can influence emotion. You
that's
can
right.
process emotion.
Yep.
You can learn to process, what we quote unquote call a negative emotion more quickly, more positively, quicker. But you can't directly. It's not like a switch. We're not machines, right? We can do stuff and we can think things. Right. So behavior, thoughts, actions. Yes, we can direct control, influence on emotion. I agree with that 100%.
And I think what I learned in that dark hallway or other dark hallways, periods in my life, is to just keep going, to
Trust.
even if you just are, even in my case, it's oftentimes the thought that might be going through my head is, this is pointless, or this is never going to work, but it's just one foot in front of the other. What seems like the next right thing to do, and then do it.
Yeah, and I've talked about this before too, that a bad decision in the wrong direction is better than a non-decision. Because at least where you were before, you've moved off of it. And maybe you took a wrong turn, but at least you moved, So I guess that like any old movement, any old action is better than indecision. Does that make sense?
It does. I think that's very often true. I mean, I think that there's a difference between indecision and taking time to think through a decision.
Oh, totally. Yes.
So like I don't think that means you always like just jump no matter what. But in general, I agree 100% that some movement, talking about depression, I always say depression hates a moving target. Just do anything besides sit there.
Right.
Or lay there. And that's really, really hard if you have depression, or if you've wrestled with it, how hard that can be.
When I was a kid, yeah.
but just moving can be so helpful. Change. You said it earlier. Pattern interrupt. Right when you went for
Yes.
your walk.
Right.
Just change the scenery. Do anything. And I think that's kind of the way life is sometimes. Is you do just have to throw a lot of things against the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah. That made me. Now we could talk a little bit about depression. So, do you still consider yourself a depressed person, and are you still like taking medication, or is that part sort of like managed now?
Well, I do take medication,
Okay.
and it is mostly managed.
Right.
But I think it's still there. But it's not there in the way that it used to be. It's not there in the way that I feel like it has much of an impact on my outer life. So I've gotten, I think in the past there were times that it would really affect my outer life. I would not want to go to work, or if I went to work, I didn't do anything, or I wouldn't engage with people, and so I think it's managed to the point and I've learned to kind of keep walking. But the periods come. They're not nearly as deep as they used to be. They are.
Sort of like the normal, a little bit more on the normal range of something that you've had like lower lows, and comparatively they're not as bad.
That's right. And I think, but it feels to me like a different thing. It's very different to me than being sad or being upset about something. When I notice it, what I notice when I'm slipping into depression is when I can't find anything that really interests me. Because normally it's like, I've got 3 books I want to read tonight. I'd love to listen to this podcast. There's 3 new records out that I want to listen to, and I want to practice guitar. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. There's so many things I want to do.
These things. Right.
But when depression starts to come on, none of that sounds appealing to me. I'm just like, yeah, whatever. That's a very different. And your
curiosity is grayed out, blacked out.
Yeah, and I think the technical term is called anhedonia. It's the inability to experience pleasure in things that normally give you pleasure. And so that's what mine is like. So it's much more minor than it used to be. But I would say yes, I still have it and I deal with it.
I went through a bout of depression while I was still in the Air Force back in Hawaii, and I was really young. So like somewhere in the ages of 21, 22, somewhere around there. And what I remember about being, and I don't know if this is, I never got diagnosed because I had a security clearance. So I never wanted to admit to anyone that I was depressed. But I was, and then I found out later that I was, and there was a series of events that helped me get out of it. But there was a couple of half-hearted suicide attempts in there, and I they were always sort of like measured approaches, where if I wasn't dead, I had to be able to get up and go to work.
Yeah.
So, oh my God, those are some really bad days. But what I remember about being depressed was like when I was alone, I would just cry and think life was stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound familiar? Because that sounds like different than yours.
I've had moments like that, but that is different than what my normal depression is. If I'm the life is stupid part, yes, because that's what I get. I get that, like, why bother? None of this really matters or means anything.
Of life. Right.
Yes.
You need it's a bigger discussion, but later on in life I came up with what I like to call placeholder answers to big questions that are ultimately unknowable objectively, that I like to fill in with positive choices. That life is absurd and it's okay.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea and a really probably solid approach for if you're the sort of person that can't seem to come to answers on those things. Right. Some people seem to believe that they know the answer, or that it all makes sense to them in some way, and more power to them, but that's never been my approach. And I think you're right. If you don't know, why not put in something that is at least serves you better?
Right. And these things, I went through, like a big chunk of life doing, spiritual seeking, right? Where I was just ravenously reading anything spiritual, right?
Right.
And then I would be journaling and writing and blogging and then I just like said, well, I'm done with that now. And then I finished it all out, and done means like you can only, I don't think I can go down those roads anymore and come up with new answers.
Right.
There's certain things about existence as a human on Earth that are unknowable to me. That was my decision. And they're paradoxical and whatever to me it's beneficial and empowering to answer them with my chosen answers, because I know that my wholeness, my whole brain is going to operate as if that it were true.
Right. Whether
or not it's empowering or disempowering. So I've just filled them in with things that I like. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because
I think
you can't know them anyway, so they might as well make them what you want them to be. That was basically, yeah. All right. So what happened? You got laid off. So then you said something about like falling back into addiction again.
Yep.
So,
I did.
So talk about that and what was the lead up to that? And then how did you climb back out of that hole?
Well, I'm trying to decide whether to do the short or the longer version.
Whichever has more value to you.
Well, I think the medium version is I was in recovery. I was married. I had a kid. I had a job. And I was very committed to helping other recovering alcoholics and addicts, and that was a big part of my life. And I had, talking about spirituality, I had some spiritual belief that I was trying really hard to believe, because 12-step recovery is very much about a higher power concept.
Right.
And so I was forcing myself into believing this thing, and then my wife left me, or I should say I left, but she was the one who initiated it. And my world kind of fell apart. My son was 2.5, and I was really suffering. And what happened in that moment is I realized I did not have a spiritual approach to life that made any sense. I didn't have something that I could lean on in times of trouble. And so I didn't go back to drinking after that. I stayed sober again for a while, but what started happening is I started drifting away from recovery.
Okay.
I started drifting away from spiritual concepts, things like there's more to life than, making myself happy. And I got very into my own happiness. What makes me happy? What feels good? And so I wasn't drinking or doing drugs, but I was back in that mindset.
You kind of got, you took a trip on the, what do they call it? The hedonistic treadmill.
Yep.
Yeah. That was one of my methods too. These are all addictions. Let's just indulge them until they go away. Yes, I did that. My name's Jeff and I'm an idiot. Thank you. Yeah. It's fun while it lasts, right?
Yeah. I mean, I did have some periods of a lot of fun, but I just drifted further and further away. And then I hit a point where the thought just came in my head, like, I don't think I'm alcoholic because, I was so young then. This is what was going on in my head at the time. I was so young then. And look at my life now. I make good decisions. I've been very successful in a career. I'm raising a son. I make a decision to go to the gym.
I figured some shit out here. Yes.
Exactly. I've been through a lot of therapy.
I deserve this.
Yeah. I just thought I could handle it. I thought that for me, it was... I thought I would. I was making
okay enough to deal with this.
Yeah, I was making good decisions in most areas of my life, and I thought, you know what, I can make a good decision about this. And it started off okay for a little while. I went back to drinking. The world didn't end the next day, but slowly over a period of time, over several years, it got worse and it got worse. And nothing, it never got anywhere near on the outside what had happened to me before. You know, I wasn't doing heroin. I wasn't living in the back of a van. Matter of fact, I was making more money than I ever had. I had better jobs than I'd ever had.
So you went down the road of being a functional alcoholic, basically.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I was.
You could still pull it together and go to work and
Barely.
I understand.
And I had people around me who were way worse than me that I could look at and go like, now those guys,
right?
You know,
those guys are alcoholics. I don't have a problem.
I go to work every day. Now, never mind that I might have gotten up and taken 3 Valium and smoked a joint to get over the hangover to go to work, right? But I was there,
right?
But a certain point just came where, you know, there were people around me who were kind of like, I don't like this part of you anymore. You've got a problem and whatever. And, but my son has been the one thing in my life that I've always, it's just the most important thing to me. And I made some bad decisions with him while I was drinking. I look back on some of them and I go, well, maybe, you know, I shouldn't have done some of those things. But by and large, I don't think my parenting, suffered a great deal. But there was one night where I was on like a 3-day binge. I was just drinking like crazy, and I went out with a friend of mine and I passed out, and I didn't go home. And now my second wife was there with my son, and so it was fine. She got him up and got to school. But that was normally my job. And that was the first time that I had just blown it like that with something like that. That had never happened. He was always, you know, to school on time. I was always at his sporting events. We always did all that stuff.
He could count on you.
He could count on me. And in that moment, I realized, oh my God, he can't. And so I think a combination of coming off a really bad binge, being sick, you know, physically just, you know,
hangover from hell. Yeah.
My wife at the time just harping at me, and my shock at what had happened, I went back to AA. And I went back very begrudgingly. And I stayed sober for about 6 really miserable months. Like, it just never went away. All I wanted to do was drink the whole time. And that had not been my experience the first time.
Right. So something had changed.
It just would not go away. And I finally broke down and drank 2 nights in a row. One night was at my wife's parents' house, and I drank beer in the bathroom until I nearly passed out. And the next day was at my house back here, and I went from sober to throwing up and passed out in about 15 to 20 minutes. It was I just could not pour the whiskey down my throat fast enough. And when I came out of that, I went, I think this is played out. You know, I had gone before, you know, the last 6 months really for my wife, for my son, and those things are all important, but I still felt like I was giving something up that still had value to me. And I think after those couple days, I kind of gave up. And I went back, and it still was hard. I don't understand what it is, but people who have had a substantial period of sobriety and go out seem to have an incredibly hard time getting back. A lot of them never do. But that was a little over 8 years ago, and I've been sober since. So
congratulations, way to go.
Yeah, it was harder though, because it was very much more of an intellectual exercise. The first time my life was just shredded. And this time I had to do a little bit more of, do I really have to ride this elevator to the bottom before I get off of it? Do I, you know, that's the old saying, you don't quit till you hit bottom. I mean, do I really have to hit that kind of bottom? Do I have to wait till I'm in a car wreck with my son because I've been drinking? Do I have to, and I just was like, no.
Whatever answer you say is true.
Right.
So if you say no, then you don't have to. But if you say yes, then you do.
Right. And I just was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm smarter than that. But it made it hard. I think it's hard in the way that quitting smoking is really hard, because the consequences feel remote. You know, when I got sober the first time, I had nowhere to live. I had, you know, like I said, about 35 years of jail time pending. The consequences were not remote. They were, you know, firmly on top of me. And
Right.
this time, again, the thing with my son, but it would be very easy to go, well, I knew my wife was there. It was fine. Those consequences were not the same. I wasn't getting DUIs. I wasn't,
Right.
but so it made it
You
harder
thought you
because
could
it was,
manage.
yeah.
You're right.
And,
which
but
makes
I
it
was,
more difficult.
but I was no more out of control the second time than I was the first time. The truth was, at both points, I was at a point where, drinking and drugs were the most important thing in the world. They were the thing that I would prioritize over everything else. And so even though from the outside it looked very like, oh, these are very different things, they weren't at the core.
Right.
The core was, that was the most important thing to me. So that was that was the second sort of I've roomed my way back into drinking and spent several years doing it, trying to convince myself it was fine. In that mindlessness, and then occasionally having moments of like, well, I don't know, which I would shove back down into mindlessness as quick as I could.
Yeah.
And then, the next big veer was to get sober again.
Right. Wow. But this is kind of sounds like a tangent, but when we talk about these things, the thing that I keep thinking about was, I don't know how I found it, but somebody on Facebook linked me to this website called Your Brain on Porn. And it's all about how modern internet porn really, really messes with your brain hormones and chemicals and dopamine mostly. And it's like this, there's no actual research because who's going to pay for that? But there's this one guy, and I think he's like a school teacher, and he did a TED Talk, and he does this web page, and it's all about the really, really bad negative effects of internet porn. So after reading all of that, I just decided to go cold turkey for 30 days. Like Tim Ferriss did this thing called Knob Nom, no booze, no masturbation for 30 days.
Uh-huh.
So I just finished one of those. And so the whole story on that is like, when you're using the internet porn, every time you look at a new face on the screen, you get this dopamine spike, and essentially your brain starts down regulating to an overdose of dopamine is. I'm oversimplifying just to keep it quick here. So that gives like the world like a sort of gray tone outside of that fix, right?
Yep.
And they're constantly comparing it to like the worst, like cocaine and heroin sorts of addictions, and it has all of these other sorts of telltale signs of addictive behavior, of you're constantly seeking a new elevation because of the body is trying to downregulate, so you're having to ramp up to get your high. It's a crazy cycle. And when I did my 30-day trial, that's what I was panicked about, because for whatever reason on Monday I started looking at porn again, and I was like, no, stop it, don't do it. Oh man, it's crazy. It's brain is funny, man. I'm glad my it seems like my life at some point after my suicide, some like guardian angel put the gutter bumpers up on my life. I've never gotten really super low again, and I'm very thankful for that. I don't know how, thank God. Yep. Okay, so let's move on to your solar business. We're getting on an hour here now. We're getting close. Yep. So we might wrap up on this story, and then maybe we'll save the next portion of your life for the next show.
All right,
cool. So you did a solar business. So tell us how you got there.
Well, I sobered up the second time, and I think I got bored. I was working, but I always seemed to need to have something going on. It's just in my nature. And so
a new challenge, a growth thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's just when I'm happiest. So I don't know why. I was at the library one day. I love the library. I think they're like the greatest I just love them. And so I was at a library and I saw a book on clean technology, and I don't know why I picked it up, but I did, and I started reading it, and I just got hooked. And I was reading it, and then I all of a sudden went, well, I think I'm going to start a solar energy company, which was crazy on a couple fronts. I mean, one is I don't know anything about it.
Probably a good thing. If you had, you wouldn't have tried.
And secondly, I live in Ohio, which is not a very sunny place, and has very cheap electricity, which turns out to be the more important thing.
Yes.
But that being said, we still had the company got going, and we had a couple $1 million years in revenue, and
that's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, I threw myself into it. Pretty wholeheartedly. Now, I wasn't able to quit all the consulting work I was doing because I had to have money coming in. So I just worked like crazy. And, but I loved it. But the point finally came where it was just clear to me that I didn't see a path forward for it here where we were. The state of Ohio started rolling back a lot of the policies that they had put in place that made me think it might be a good idea. And we just had a lot of what I would just call bad timing. We were consistently about 6 months late on everything. We would get to a point. There was one point we had about $12 million in signed contracts, and the state of Ohio decided that it was going to stop a rebate program, and all our investors pulled out. And we had a couple of different events like that. And kind of after about the third one of those, I finally looked at it and I went, I'm not enjoying it anymore. I just am not, like, I'm trying to push this forward, but I'm worn out. It's not fun anymore. And so, I just kind of gradually walked away from that company. I had a partner who was running it for a while, but right now it's pretty much dormant. There's not much happening. There's a bunch of solar systems around the state of Ohio that I can drive by and feel good that we got put up, but it kind of, I lost the desire to do it at a certain point.
Wow. Yeah, that's whenever you're dealing with the whims of the government, any government, that it's a precarious business model, right?
Oh yeah, that's a lesson I learned. I knew it going in. If you'd asked me what are the risks to the business, I would have said, well, dependence on government.
Right. Yes.
But I don't think I had any idea how quickly those things can change and how dramatically. And part of my job, a lot of my job became going down to the Senate and the Ohio State House and going to Washington and trying to testify and build a case for a lot of these things. And that just the first couple of times I did it, I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then, but after a little while,
Mr. Smith goes to Washington.
Right. But after a while I went, I don't like it here. I don't like this. It started to become.
Why should I be, chasing this windmill sort of feel?
Yeah. That, and the, it just became real clear that, if we have a fund, if we throw a fundraiser for X senator, then we can get 15 minutes time alone with him to make our case. But if we don't, we'll get his aid. We'll get his aid one day when they have time. I mean, it became clear to me how a lot of it really did work, and that's. Sure. I'm not trying to be overly cynical, but that was just the reality.
Yeah.
Of what we were facing, and I just started to not like it, and that was kind of the end. Where I got with it all was I just am not. This isn't fun anymore, and
if it's not a hell yeah, right?
Well, yeah, or if you're gonna, it's just the ups and downs, and the effort and the stress and all the things that come with running your own business, are offset by passion and love and a lot of that stuff. But if that passion and love goes away, you've got yourself a pretty dark place to be, because. Honestly, a regular job is far better than a your own company that you don't like, in my opinion.
Oh, totally. I mean, that's worse. Having a business that you don't want anymore.
Yeah. Yep.
That's worse because you've got all the headaches and the fear and everything that's bad about entrepreneurship, and you don't have all the bennies, all the good stuff.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
right. Ouch. Nothing wrong with walking away from that. Would have been nice to sell out and have a nice payday. But, Cinderella doesn't always win.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I just had to, that was one, that was another, I vroomed pretty hard on that for,
right. Yeah, I can tell.
And there was a period of time where I just kept trying to sort of ignore the reality that was around me.
The Veer was there in front of you. You knew that you had to separate yourself from that. Right.
Yep. And it took me a while to get to the place where I could do it. It took me a while to, it's sort of like when I was talking about recovery from alcoholism addiction, these moments come up where you're like, yeah, I think this is probably a bad idea. And then you just shove it back down and go on. And, so that it's back to that idea of the epiphany. Usually it's been brewing for a little while.
Yes.
And so it was the same thing there. It had been brewing for a while, and I finally had to get to a place, and I had to be okay with walking away from, it was, there's certainly an ego thing to it. We were, like I said, $1 million company. I was testifying at the Senate. I was in newspapers. We were in a hot new field. And so ego-wise, I had to kind of walk away from that and just go, well, I'm not that anymore. And
right. You kind of start identifying yourself with the company and the effort and the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's part of vrooming. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. And so I was definitely there. And so I had to, that was, something you put that much time into is kind of your baby to a large degree, even if you don't want to raise it anymore.
It's devastating.
You still don't.
It's like getting dumped.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. But I think it happened gradually, and I was in a place where I think for whatever reason I had my head on well enough to be able to go, this just isn't right anymore. Did we fail? Yeah, we did. And what can I learn from that? And there's certainly a lot of lessons I got out of that I try and apply to things I do today.
That's great. This has been an amazing show for me. I've had a blast. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and being open and vulnerable. Wow, this has been like my favorite show.
Well, right back at you. You've been very open too. It's been a fun conversation for sure.
So let's. I'm going to put a reminder to call you in 6 months to a year, because I want to get more of the one you feed, and I want to get more Eric Zimmer, and maybe we'll get Chris to tag along someday. That would be awesome.
That would be awesome.
Maybe a little guitar action. That would be cool.
Yeah. We'll serenade you. Every answer we give, we'll do in song.
There you go. I'm down. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Thanks for taking the time to ride along with us on another episode of Vroom Vroom Veer. For podcast info and show notes, be sure to head over to vvveer.com. That's VVER.com. Man, that's fun to say. And we'll catch up with you next time here on Vroom Vroom Veer.